budgets, procurement, uniforms, some disciplining action in the case where an officer's case could be referred to civilian authorities rather than remain in-house in the military. That's basically what we did when I was on a council from 1986 to about 1989, 1990.
So you weren't really discussing security of the country issues at all?
Not really. By then, the security of the country issues were... The Seychelles had sort of moved on by the mid-late 80s. The threats, external threats, I imagine, were not what they were, let's say, in the very early 80s. So the Defense Council at the time I was there was more an administrative meeting of senior Army officers to discuss day-to-day Army issues. Any other issues may have been dealt with by more private committees, possibly. But the Council itself really just, I remember we discussed promotions mostly, budgets, what we're going to buy in the way of uniforms and trucks, and we didn't even discuss the procurement of arms, for instance.
So there were nothing about strategic issues. Strategic issues, no, nothing.
Like what, sir?
Strategic issues on defense.
Yeah, I mean, but there's no, you know, back, like I said, by the time I got on the committee in the mid-86, the defense had taken a different role. I believe the external threat was diminished quite substantially in terms of the mercenary attack 5 years prior. So we didn't really have any issues to discuss in terms of a threat.
But that was the external. What about the internal?
Internal threat, I don't know. That was dealt with. That was a different issue for us. We didn't discuss internal threats. Not with me there. Maybe with other members in different subcommittees may have discussed internal threats, but I was a surveillance. My part of it was maritime surveillance. I was employed as I was representing the air wing, eventually the People's Air Force, which was a surveillance unit. Basically, we flew around looking for illegal fishermen.
What was your rank when you joined the council?
I think I was a captain at the time.
Captain.
Yeah. It may have been a major. I'm not really sure on the dates. I retired as a lieutenant colonel, but it was either a captain or a major. You know.
And when was that? When you retired? When?
I retired?
Yeah. When?
Well, I semi-retired in 1989 when I joined Air Seychelles as an airline captain on their jets. But I actually resigned my commission, I think it was in 93. In 93, I resigned my commission. I remember because I resigned my commission when I became a captain on the Boeing 767, and therefore I decided to concentrate on that part of my career rather than the sort of Air Force part of it, the military wing part of it, civilian career, which is what I've done since then.
And were you involved in disciplinary matters? You were on a disciplinary...
The only disciplinary matters I dealt with were within the camp which I was in charge of, which was at the Prince Larry camp at the airport. And most of those disciplinary charges were soldiers who didn't come back from their pass. I was never on, for instance, a court-martial, for instance. No. And again, the only, in the commission, in the council, the only issue I remember in disciplinary was one or two officers who'd done a civilian offense. And of course, the decision had to be made whether to treat it in-house or send a file to the commissioner or to the attorney general for prosecution as in a civilian court. I remember one case of that, but I can't remember any other cases where we...
So you said...
You were in charge of the Point Larry Army camp?
Absolutely.
When? During what period?
From 1986 onwards.
Okay.
Until basically 1991 or something like that, 92.
So involving training, because I know there was a training school there.
We actually set up the training academy. One of my officers was in charge of setting up the SPDF training academy. The camp was basically mandated with airport security. That's why it was set at Pendari. It was an airport security base.
So your experience was, I'm asking, I'm putting words in your mouth, but it was well disciplined, the army. Your camp, you had command over it. It was.
Oh yes, I mean, the Air Force was a disciplined unit, and then when I was mandated to take over the security of the Air Force in the Army section of it, I tried as much as possible to take discipline. Yes, I mean, we had officers, we kept discipline. Soldiers were in their barracks. They went out on their daily or weekly passes and reported for duty, and they had their duties within the unit to just keep airport surveillance and maintain, that the airport wasn't, I guess, attacked by external forces.
Where and when happened your military training?
Very good question. I defaulted into a lot of this, if you understand what I'm trying to say. When I say I defaulted into all of this, when I came back, as I said earlier just now, I joined the Ministry of Agriculture as a pilot to fly an aircraft the British had given to the Seychelles government. And one of the terms of the donation of this aircraft from the government of the United Kingdom was that the aircraft would have to be out of the hands of the military. So therefore, it was allocated to the Ministry of Agriculture, and we call it the Fisheries Protection Flight, which was mandated to just do surveillance for then the newly established exclusive economic zone. So we patrolled this zone looking for illegal Japanese longliner fishes. There were no purse seiners in those days. I guess as the British lost interest, and it became more and more apparent that the aircraft was more as a Coast Guard type thing, it transformed into the Coast Guard. So I sort of transformed with it. I never actually did any official military training in the Seychelles. I had some basic drill training done by local instructors at the sort of beginning when it metamorphosized into the Air Wing, Coast Guard, Air Wing, and eventually the Air Force. But I wasn't trained overseas, for instance. I would like to have gone to India. I sent a lot of my officers to India for training. And a few went to the United States as well. We had a fairly good relationship, even contrary to a lot of belief, we had a fairly good relationship with the United States as well. But I just happened to be the man on the ground first. And of course, what I was doing was primarily an aviation related business, and I was an aviation professional, the first post Second World War aviation professional. Yeah.
And you retired as Lieutenant Colonel.
I retired as Lieutenant Colonel. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, well, there you go, huh?
So this whole concept of following orders and everything, that wasn't drilled into you, but you just...
No, I mean, you follow orders because, like, you follow instructions from your superiors. I mean, you're not... shit, I thought I turned this off, sorry. I had, in fact... My apologies, I thought I actually turned it to silent. Give me a second. There we go. Sorry. All right. I'm not sure what you mean by following orders. I mean, a military unit lives on following orders. You can't have an effective military if people don't follow the orders. We've all seen the consequences of different militaries in the last 75 years of officers following orders and not following orders. So yes, you expect your officers to follow orders. It's not the following orders that's the issue. It's more of the orders given. I think is the question here. I mean, there's no way you're going to run an effective police force organization. I mean, in your organization here, there's a hierarchy that needs to be followed. So yes, I mean, I didn't need to be drilled to know that I had to follow orders. The secret is what orders are you going to follow.
I mean, when you joined, were you aware that the army had a reputation that wasn't, a really...
Well, no, because when I joined in the 80s, the army was very new. There was, Jesus wept. Sorry. Let me try and turn this bloody thing off. Well. There we go. I think I finally worked out. It's one of these UIs. I think it does it on purpose. Sorry, where were we? We were talking about, you've got to remember in the early 80s when I joined, the army was a very new concept. It was 3 years old, 3 or 4 years old. I didn't actually join the army as such. I joined a very exclusive air wing part of it where we were very much isolated. We were very much insular in where we were. We sort of heard stories about some officers doing some things maybe they shouldn't be doing. But like at the time, it's only maybe later that you heard some stories. Not necessarily all of them are true, but you heard some of them.
So you were never given what you would consider an illegal
Oh,
order?
hell no.
No, never.
No, the commander-in-chief at the time didn't consider myself somebody who would give orders to directly other than please take me to this island because I want to go and have a look at something. It's illegal orders, no, definitely not.
How did what was his title? The chief of Mr. Rene's position, Commander-in-Chief.
Commander-in-Chief.
How did he get around to the various islands, for example?
He sent a request for the aircraft and we flew him there.
Oh, okay.
In other words, if he wanted to go to Koitivi, he'd send a request down through his protocol and say he wants to go to Koitivi or Deroche or wherever he wanted to go, and we would make the arrangements and fly him there. It was the same for any of the other senior officers who wanted to go somewhere. Because we also did inter-island communication. At the same time, the air wing not only did surveillance, it also did inter-island communication. We were responsible for all inter-island communication to the islands of Farquhar, Astove, Assumption, Deroche, Marie-Louise. I can't think of any others at the time. So yes, I've been to them all.
So there was a whole radio system that linked up these islands?
The islands? It was linked through the civilian
cable and wireless.
telecommunication system called Bon Espoir.
At Bon Espoir.
Bon Espoir was a cable and wireless run organization that was responsible for high-frequency telecommunications between the other islands. So we...
But you were connected?
Yeah, because the
as
islands were
well.
civilian islands. They were run by a company called Island Development Corporation. And they were under the auspices of the IDC, and they were being developed as per the government's 5-year plan of the day. And we were just responsible for flying people, mostly workers, to and from the islands, sometimes medevacs, depending on the cases.
But going back to the council,
Yeah.
you said earlier that it was mainly sort of administrative issues and so on. But what about, this being the Defence Force Council, the security of the country and I guess the security of the government at the time, it was still the one-party system, must have been of great significance. Where were these issues discussed then? Matters of security of the country and of the president?
Well, it depends what you mean by, you've got to, from what I recall, the matters of security, Seychelles was not under threat 24/7 by anybody as such, that I know of.
But there had been...
There had been in the past, there'd been a mercenary attempt in 1981, there'd been a rebellion in the army a year later, and then there'd been a change of guard in 86. But I don't think the Seychelles was really under a significant threat. If the United States, for instance, who invaded Grenada, had decided to invade the Seychelles, it would have been a 4-hour affair. They did Grenada in 24 hours. They obviously were not interested in invading the Seychelles, neither were the British nor the French nor anybody else. Probably because they probably had very good relations with the Seychelles, all these countries I just mentioned. So the threat, once the sort of threat of the, I guess the mercenary threat had diminished, when for whatever reason people had seen the geopolitical situation of the world by the mid-80s was changing. I mean, we didn't have to be, all of us here, I'm sure, well, not all of us, some of us here are old enough to realize that by the mid-80s, people knew that the Soviet system was on its way out. We didn't need to be told that, and that the change was going to come eventually. So I imagine the threat was diminishing. And I don't know what back channels were taking place in discussions between the then head of state, commander-in-chief, and let's say the opposition groups that existed outside of the Seychelles, governments maybe not openly sympathetic to the Seychelles, but under the backhand deals that are taking place for changes to come. Because I remember when the change actually came sometime in the early 90s, it was a surprise to a lot of people who didn't read the geopolitical writings on the wall, is what I'd like, this is how I see it. So to say the threat in 87, let's say, there wasn't much of a threat anymore. It was not the threat there was, let's say, in 1977, 78, 80.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the change of the guards in 1986.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Why was there this shift? And why
The change
did
of the
you-
guards, you have to ask some other people. All I know is that some senior army officers were made redundant, along with a senior minister made redundant. And of course, that's when I, as a next level of sort of army officer, moved in to fill the void, basically. And so we came there because we were invited to come to the Defense Council because the existing members had been made redundant.
So I suppose when you talk about 1986, things had changed. I mean, Gerard Wawo had been assassinated by then, right? He was assassinated in 85, was it? 85.
Who's that now? Oh, yes, that was well before, yeah.
And then we had also Mr. Withers, right? Mr. Withers was doing the intelligence work with Minister Berlui at that time.
Yeah.
But that was sort of all over, I guess.
Well, I
by-
think he was made
yeah.
redundant as
Yeah.
well at the same
Yeah.
time.
86.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, I'm talking about the lady here, where she's referencing security threat. Well, Defense Council by 86, 87, 88, it was really an administrative affair. I mean, we weren't looking at, as I said, we don't know what was going on under the table between the president and opposition groups overseas. I don't know. I'm not privy to what it was. But obviously, if you look historically at it, or in hindsight, you'll see that there must have been some chat going on. Because when the change came, it came very suddenly. It was literally woke up one morning and the then head of state got up and said, I've decided to adopt a multi-party system, multi-party democracy. And so people sort of said, what? Yeah.
So you didn't really suffer at all under a one-party state?
When you say suffer, what do you mean by suffer?
Well, I mean, I was
underpaid.
Yeah, underpaid, yeah. But I mean, you didn't feel like, you were not
No.
victimized in any way.
No, absolutely not. No, I'm not here as a victim
Yeah,
witness.
and did you feel you had freedom of speech and those sorts of things? So, as a member of the Defense Council, could you say
No. You didn't. You had to be. I mean, especially in the military, you had to be careful what you say, because you have, you do sign documents precluding you from opening your mouth about defense materials. I mean, and that's natural anywhere in the world. I mean, in any country that has a defense force, You can't just go around. But talking about freedom of speech, it grew, shall I say. I'm not really here as an expert in those political things, but I would say that as we approached, it's been a progressive growth to where today in Seychelles we probably have more freedom of speech than you have in European countries, for instance. It's been a progressive movement. A sidebar on this, if we look at the Seychelles as what it was in 1976 at the day of independence, in the geopolitical situation of the world at that time, and we look at the rest of the countries around the world at that time, they were all in a progressive growth. I mean, I'm not sure where you're from, but you may find that you were also in the same situation. You probably find that things were taking place 30, 40 years ago that you look at today and say, how did we have that taking place? I'm absolutely sure of that. So it was a growth path that I looked at. I viewed it that way. I may have a bit of hindsight in that I wasn't born here, I didn't grow up here. I grew up in East Africa, and I'd seen true oppression, true victimization. I'd seen what a real coup d'etat was, twice. So what I saw here, I could sort of, in my own limited sense, feel that it was just a growth pattern. And you have hiccups in your growth patterns.
Whereabouts in East Africa?
I was born in Uganda.
In Uganda. Okay, Uganda.
When the change of the guards happened, you did want to comment on what has happened. What was the perception, if you don't want to sort of give your own views, what was the perception in the mind of the Seychellois in those days?
Seychelles is difficult for me to say. I mean, within the military itself, there may have been those that sort of said, well, okay, we needed a change of guard. There would be those that enjoyed the old guard, I mean, like everything else, you have those, you have a country split 50-50 right now. Just about every single country in this world, right as we speak here in this commission today, is split 50-50, without exception almost. So you're always going to have those that are happy with the change and those that are not happy with the change. And because I know some of the old guard, I don't think it's appropriate for me to make a comment about perceptions, because it is perception. So we'll just sort of leave everybody to have their own perception. And those that have a different perception, I'm sure if they come to your commission, we'll be quite at liberty to express that. But I would prefer to refrain from expressing an opinion on that.
So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. My apologies for the
That's okay.
the UI. Yeah.
The ringtone was nice, so it wasn't an annoying ringtone. Thank you very much. So we appreciate that. I think we understand from the time you're on the Defence Council, it was really administration, promotions, nothing to do with security of the country, state secrets, none of them.
No.
So it was quite a
No, not at all.
administrative body.
No.
We have no further questions for you. We thank you for coming, unless you have a question for us.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Carry on with the work.
Thank you very much. We will adjourn now and return at 1 p.m. Thank you. Thank you.
All rise.